It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show on this Tuesday, Heritage Day. South Africa, like many countries, have a rather turbulent history when it comes to human rights. And the vision to end human suffering continues for organizations like the Justice Desk, which partners with locals to know and use their rights practically. Now, Impact and Advocacy Manager from the organization, Keenan Jacobs, joins us along with Dr. Laura Fisher from Boston City campus to talk about how unemployment impacts our human rights. Good morning and welcome to you both. Welcome to your Feel Good Breakfast Show.
Thank you so much.
Happy Human Rights Day.
Thank you.
Look, I'm glad we are talking about this because we have to talk about it. It is such an incredibly important topic for, the people of South Africa. I'm going to jump straight into you with you, Edward. Our constitution continues to be, lauded as this great vision. There's talks, there's plans, we hear about these things happening, but we're failing to see real change on the ground. Why is that?
Yeah, so as you say, our constitution is widely lauded, and rightfully so, because we have a constitution that protects a wide ambit of rights, from the right to education, to the right to health, clean water, a safe environment. But there's a disjuncture between what we see on paper and what we see in reality. And it is our view that this is due to the actions and, I guess, inactions of multiple governments since 1994, because a constitution is simply a framework, right? It's an articulator of a social vision. It's an ensemble of values. It tells us where we want this country to be and go. But it has no agency in and of itself, right? We need policy, we need politicians, we need governance.
We need action.
Exactly, to bring that constitution alive. And many people say that the constitution is often the reason why South Africa is in a mess today, and I tend to disagree with that, because if you look at our constitutional values, even if you look at the sort of seminal constitutional judgments, like the Grootboom case, where the Constitutional Court essentially forced government to provide adequate housing to unhoused people. Also, where the Treatment Action Campaign case, where government was essentially forced to provide antiretrovirals to mothers to not transmit HIV and AIDS to their newborns. So what this tells us is that our constitution is there. It's not perfect, but it's, I think Dick Kamoseneke said there's no perfect constitutions, but ours is as good as it gets. So, and I tend to agree with that.
Absolutely, but I mean, it needs to extend outside of that as well.
Exactly.
We need to see that action, we need to see that change. I know that we are talking about unemployment, but I mean, there's so many issues plaguing human rights. We are talking about gender-based violence.
Exactly.
We're talking about lack of water. There's xenophobia. Gender-based violence is a big one as well. But, we need to see a different conversation, different types of movement within our constitution to really rectify that. But on the topic of unemployment, Dr. Fisher, how would you say does it affect human rights? Specifically, I'm glad we're talking about this on today, a day like today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show. I think that it has a massive impact on human rights. I think that it has an impact on the right to care, the right to education, the right to housing, the right to services. So when you're unemployed, I think the biggest impact that I can see when I look around me is that it gives people a sense of loss of agency. And there's almost a hopelessness that sets in, and that hopelessness has implications in terms of how people are actually able to step out of the cycle of poverty and step into accessing that which is rightfully theirs according to the constitutional rights that they have.
Look, it must be incredibly frustrating, for, I think, the youth of South Africa who's really battling with unemployment, wanting to do something, wanting to better themselves, get themselves in a different situation, but there's just no opportunity to do that. What is the current unemployment rate in South Africa?
Sure. What is the...
the youth unemployment rate is close to 60%, and the sort of general unemployment rate is touching 50%, which is just staggering.
Now, listen, we spoke about all these other issues, gender-based violence, xenophobia, access to sanitary needs as well, water, unemployment. What conversations do we need to have? And also, do these... these plaguing points need to be addressed separately, or do you see them as the Justice Desk as a whole?
Yeah, so I'll answer your second question first. Definitely, we have to see them as together because a core part of what human rights are is that they are indivisible and interdependent, right? So they rely on each other. And if you think about it, if we look at the right to health and the right to clean water, they are intrinsically linked, right? You cannot see them as separate. Right. The right to education and the right to food, you can't teach someone if they have an empty stomach. So these rights are
under one umbrella.
Exactly, they have to be under one umbrella, and we have to tackle them holistically in order to make strides. And you spoke about the sort of shifting conversation and what needs to shift in order for us to actually realize our human rights. And I've mentioned that we need to put pressure on our government. We need to ensure that our leaders are held accountable. But more importantly, we need to understand our human rights as everyday people.
Look, I feel that we are moving in that direction.
Exactly.
But you can feel the frustration amongst South Africa because, you know what, we have a beautiful country. We have so much going for this country. We need to really address these issues. Thank you very much. We're going to be back with you guys in just a little bit, continuing this conversation on human rights. Stick around.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for rejoining a vitally important conversation as we delve into the theme for Human Rights Day 2023, and that is consolidating and sustaining human rights culture into the future. And I say it so deliberately as I try to absorb and understand myself, because that's how we need to approach this day. We are continuing our discussion with Impact and Advocacy Manager Keenan Jacobs from the Justice Desk and Dr. Laura Fisher from Boston City Campus around the injustices that still need tackling in our country. Thank you so much for joining us on your day off. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Like we spoke about earlier, there's still a lot to do. There's a lot being said, there's a lot being talked about, but we need to see physical action and change on the ground. And I think that's where it's so important. I wanted to touch on what Graham said, saying that the theme, very slowly, consolidating and sustaining human rights culture into the future. Now, for you guys at the Justice Desk, how do you view this? What do you make of the theme?
I think it's quite an ambitious theme. I think it's a good theme. But I guess the theme presupposes that we already have a human rights culture in South Africa. And I think it's nascent at best. And organizations like Justice Desk Africa, we believe that in order to build a human rights culture, we need to empower the everyday person, ordinary people like you and me. We need to ensure that we understand our human rights so that we can go out there and not only understand them, but also hold those accountable who are not enforcing them and defending them. So a large part of what our view on this is, let's think about how can we start to build one? How can we start to actually construct a human rights culture that kids coming through, that we actually feel like, okay, that our rights to water, our right to health, our right to education, these things are protected and that they are actually enforced by our authorities. So yeah, that would be our view on this theme for this year.
That was a very PC answer. That was great, man. Thank you so much for giving us
What can I say?
Yeah, you're in the right part. I'm sure you could say a lot, buddy. I'm sure you could say a lot. I'm going to offer a counterpoint and say that the culture does exist within academia. It's there. We talk about our constitution. We talk about the lessons learned from our history. It's there in educational bodies that are there to empower us. But it starts with the individual. When we look at this bigger picture, it can be overwhelming. When we look at our own place, our own position, that's where the action actually starts. What do we need to be asking ourselves right now? What do we need to look into in terms of our own position, our own perspective? Where do you think we start, Dr. Fisher?
Okay, if I think about where we really start, we do start with education. And that touches into my colleague's point, that we actually need to create a culture where people understand what their rights are. And so I think everyone in this country needs to know that they have a right to education. And one of the things that we can celebrate today is that there are more and more people enrolled in education, both in the basic education sector, but also in the higher education sector. And educational institutions such as Boston City Campus actually speak to the individual and say, where are you at? And we can create an educational pathway for you because you deserve better. And you actually deserve to fulfill the purpose for which you were put on this earth. So I think that is really where it starts at if we look at the individual. It's about the individual being empowered. Purposefulness is an axiom upon which we build the way we think about our lives. And when we lack purposefulness, we start to undermine ourselves and get entrenched in these cycles of poverty that are leading to the situation we have today. So actually to come back to what is my purpose and to wake up and say, where am I at and what can I do to begin to better my situation?
With that knowledge and the education that you receive and try to receive as well, which is so important. I want to flip it around a little bit, because often when we talk about human rights, we talk about the gender-based violence, like we've mentioned before as well, water, unemployment, it's a lot of negative all the time. But what do you see in a positive space? What positive change do you see with regards to human rights currently? Where are we?
And go.
I think, to be honest, though, there are many green shoots. There are many positives. For example, our right to democracy and our right to political participation is fantastic. We had an election in 2019. We have one coming up next year. We have multiple municipal elections and a thriving opposition bloc. And it's not every country, every African country that can say that they have free and fair elections on a regular basis. Right. Our right to protest is also thriving and well. I'm sure.
We know that.
We had, we had the massive protest yesterday, and obviously, rightly or wrongly, we have different views on it. But we can all agree that the right to stand up when we are seeing things that are wrong is important, right?
Wow.
And then also our freedom of speech. The fact that I can sit here and critique our government and without fear of being, abused or anything is massive, especially on our continent.
We've come a long way.
Exactly.
Sure, yeah.
And those things are worth celebrating. And then I guess lastly, just freedom and equality before the law. It's not every country that can say a former president spent a few nights in jail. And although, people can agree and disagree on that, but that is a massive thing. The fact that regardless of how powerful you are, regardless of how much money you have, that our law applies to all of us equally. And those are the core components of a successful democracy and a successful country. So many, many positives, but much more work to do.
Yeah. And we just need young people to understand that those rights exist.
Exactly.
Let's make those connections right now with you, our viewers, who undoubtedly know how to frame this the best. And I say that because Nirmala is about to weigh in. We love you. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us this morning. Let's hear from her.
Good morning, Feel Good Expresso team. I pray y'all are having a good start to Human Rights Day today. What I'd like to say is let us celebrate. Let us celebrate those beautiful voices, those firm, deep-rooted individuals that stood tall and asked for one voice in one nation. And also, what they fought for was, regardless of race, creed, color, you name it, status, a dignified living for all human beings. Mrs. Nirmala Devi Mudley, have an awesome day.
And she's from Nkomazi, in case you missed it. She is absolutely amazing. We love you. Thank you so much. Let's go to the social media feed now and see what you've had to say.
All right, so William says, we have the right to live and the rest will follow. I love that. Simple, down to the point. NP says, good morning, South Africa. Have a blessed Human Rights Day. We all have the right to education and the right to live. And once again, it comes down to that education, once again, being a key component.
It's the activator,
yeah, it's the activator in our human rights. Thank you very much to you both for joining us this morning. Thank you for the incredible work that you guys are doing. Lovely to have you here. And I think it's important to, focus on what the good as well that's being done. Like you've rightly said, there's so much we can focus on, but yet I think a lot we need to do to change.
Completely. And Doctor, to ease your mind a little bit, I interviewed 3,000 kids coming out of the Cape Flats before COVID. Not one of them had a why, a reason as to why they wanted to progress beyond and get into the TV land. I did that exact same show post-COVID. Out of the 3,000 kids that came to speak, not one of them said, I wanted to be rich and famous. Every single one of them had a why. Every single one of them had a purpose. They're going to be fine regardless of us. Thank the Lord. We are going to be all right, but we need your input. So please, please weigh in this morning. 063-408-8863. If you need your voice to be heard, this is where to do it.